What's up, you guys? Void here, coming back at you all with another Commander deck video for one of my patrons again. This is for another new one, Kyle. He wanted me to do a Maga Traitor to Mortals Commander deck. If you are unfamiliar with the legend from Saviors from Kamigawa, Maga is 3 black mana and X in the cost for a 0/0 legendary creature human wizard that enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. And when Maga comes into play, target player loses life equal to the number of +1/+1 counters on it. With Maga Traitor to Mortals and X-costed commander option, you must understand the additional cost each time that you pay your commander is generic mana. It's not going to be in addition to the X. So it's not like Prosh Skyraider of Care where that is going to count towards the total mana that you pay into it. Rather, X is its own part of the mana cost that you have to pay separate from the rest or any other additional costs to pay it, such as the commander tax each time you want to replay your commander. So that is definitely something you have to pay attention to. But other than that, the strategy is quite simple. It's black burn. There's a lot of these fireball effects that we see in red, all these different spells that are 3 red mana or 2 red mana and then X, and you get to dump a whole bunch of mana into them. We have a whole bunch of similar things in black, but for the most part, it's going to deal with loss of life. Black is very unique. It's not going to deal with damage. So if your opponents have any way of preventing damage, this is going to get around that pretty easily. If we take a look at the lands now, it's going to be mono black, and we do have an emphasis on getting some decent ramps, so we're going to play some pretty important ones. Bajuka Bog is more or less just utility against graveyard decks. Pretty good, auto-include. Boseiju, who shelters all. This is important because we do play a lot of massive X-costed spells that are instants and sorceries, and making those to where they can't be countered is fantastic. This deck is all about getting those off. If we can't, then we're in trouble. We do play Cabal Coffers, which is so important, probably one of the most important cards in this entire deck. All we have to do is just make sure we have a ton of swamps out there, then we can add a bunch of black mana to our mana pool. We have a Deserted Temple in here for the sole purpose of being able to untap our Cabal Coffers, so that we can then tap it again. Myriad Landscape is going to get us 2 swamps from our deck onto the battlefield tapped. Usually one of the better lands that you can play turn 1. Nykthos Shrine to Nyx. Not as good as Cabal Coffers because our potential of getting Devotion to Black isn't as high as our potential of getting a ton of swamps out there. So Nykthos is still going to get us a decent amount of mana if we're lucky, but at worst we at least want to break even. We do have Thespian Stage and Vesuva. I think these two are practically the same. Vesuva's a little bit better because we don't have to pay any mana in order to have it become a copy. But the funny thing is that Cabal Coffers is not a legendary land. As good as it is, we really don't have any reason not to want to copy it, because the more Cabal Coffers we get out there, the more mana we get, the more we get to dump it into Maga so that we can then kill off a player, hopefully. And to make Cabal Coffers even more effective, we have Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth, which is going to make each land a swamp, including Cabal Coffers, which isn't technically a swamp, so our total swamp count is going to go up, making Cabal Coffers even more viable. And it is worth noting that we have an extra planar lens, so we're going to be playing 27 snow-covered swamps. That way our opponents don't get that mana that we would get. Moving on to artifacts, very important that we get a ton of ramp. That is all that we're playing really, is just awesome ramp, stuff that's going to make it easier for us to dump more mana into Maga. We have Everflowing Chalice, kind of a cool mana sink. This is basically mana sink tribal, so we have no problem dumping a bunch of mana, getting that multi-kicker with the Everflowing Chalice. Expedition Map is going to help us get our Cabal Coffers. Awesome artifact, definitely needs a reprint sometime soon. Pyramid of the Pantheon from Amonkhet. This card is really cool and really underrated. We can just store some brick counters on it, and then once it has 3 brick counters, we can then tap it for 3 mana of any one color. So that is really cool. Yeah, it's going to cost you 2 generic and tapping it each turn in order to get those 3 brick counters, so it's going to take some time before you can get it up there, but having it tap for 3 mana is pretty cool. Sensei's Divining Top, good consistency, and black is never a bad thing. Soul Ring, pretty basic. Charcoal Diamond is going to tap for 1 black on a 2 mana artifact. That's pretty decent. Doubling Cube is fantastic in this deck. Again, we have a few mana sinks in our deck to where we don't really mind dumping as much mana as we possibly can into them to get the maximum effect. 3 generic and tapping it to double the amount of each type of mana in our mana pool is perfect. Jet Medallion, gonna make our black spells cost 1 less. Mind Stone, another 2 mana rock, can sacrifice itself to draw us a card. That is pretty cool. Basalt Monolith, and we also play Rings of Brighthearth. I think that's worth noting. Those two give us infinite colorless mana. You just have to make sure you have enough mana in order to get it started, but once you do have that, you can pretty much just knock a player out of the game pretty easily with Maga, and it should set you up nicely for the rest of the game. And we of course have extra planar lens. As I stated earlier, we do have those 27 snow-covered swamps, so it is important that our opponents can't tap just any basic swamp for double mana. So that is the only reason why you don't necessarily need to have the snow-covered swamps, but it is optimal to have them. We have Worn Power Stone, a 3 mana Soul Ring that comes into play tapped, is still pretty good. Hedron Archive, going to tap for 2 mana, but it's also going to be able to sacrifice itself to draw us 2 cards. It's basically the Mind Stone times 2. Nevinyrral's Disc is good colorless removal for artifacts, creatures, and enchantments, which black has good removal for creatures, not really much removal for anything else. Panharmonicon is fantastic. This card is perfect for this deck because Maga has 2 triggers when Maga enters the battlefield. You have the +1/+1 counters that are going to be on Maga, and you also have the targets for players who are going to lose life equal to the number of +1/+1 counters. So Maga could end up with a whole bunch of +1/+1 counters because of this, and you get 2 targets, so that is fantastic. Thran Dynamo, even more ramp. 3 colorless for 4 mana. Gauntlet of Power, another mana doubler. Again, we want as much mana as we can possibly get. Black has a whole bunch of ways to double up our mana, so adding to that is never a bad thing. Gilded Lotus is going to tap for 3 colored mana, which is pretty sweet. A little bit better than the Thran Dynamos and the other mana rocks that are just going to tap for colorless mana. This is going to get us 3 black mana, which is important for Maga. And we have Caged Sun, same thing as Gauntlet of Power, a little bit better for us because it only really works for our mana, which is pretty good. And playing our bridge, again, mana sinks are fantastic. This is a pretty decent mana sink if you have a lot of excess mana. If you can dump 8 into there and then tap it, we can search for a permanent card, maybe another mana doubler, set us up perfectly for a Maga casting so that we can then knock a player out of the game that way. Now, as far as our creatures go, we have 10 of them. We have Walking Ballista, yet again another cool mana sink. If we're desperate and Maga isn't going to do enough, or we can't really get Maga back into our command zone so that we can cast Maga again, we can just dump a bunch of mana into Walking Ballista, have it stay out there, and then just ping players that way. Burnished Heart is going to get us 2 swamps, kind of like Myriad Landscape, but on a creature, so that's pretty cool. Cryptghast, another mana doubler. This is pretty cool, though, because we can also extort our spells, which is very underrated. We can gain some life that way. But yeah, black has a lot of cool ways of just getting a massive amount of mana. Phyrexian Obliterator, kind of going with the theme of Black Burn. Whenever a source deals damage to Phyrexian Obliterator, that source's controller sacrifices that many permanents. So it's more or less just going to be a deterrent, but it works out pretty well. If our opponents just want to swing out at us, we can just pick their biggest creature, block it, and then they're going to pay the price for doing that. Really cool card. Solemn Simulacrum, more consistency in black, never a bad thing. Grey Merchant of Asphodel, kind of like Black Burn yet again. Devotion isn't going to be the most reliable thing, but you'd be surprised. You might just have 8 Devotion. That's still going to be a big deal in a multiplayer game. You're going to gain life equal to the total life lost that way. So many games you can get back into it just with Grey Merchant alone. So fantastic inclusion for this deck. Magus of the Coffers, basically the creature form of Cabal Coffers, just like all of the Maguses are. Never really hurts to have multiple of those abilities out on the field at the same time. Massacre Worm, yet again another cool creature that fits in pretty well with Black Burn. If our opponents have a lot of tokens, we can easily just kill off all of them and then deal a whole bunch of life lost to them. Almost said damage, caught myself there. But it's really cool because it doesn't even have to be off of the enter the battlefield trigger with the -2/-2. It could just be off of any old board wipe, and our opponents are going to lose 2 life for each creature that's dying, so that's pretty cool. Nirkana Revenant, another cool mana doubler in black. Black loves getting extra mana. And in addition to that, you also get a cool shade effect where Nirkana Revenant can pump herself up +1/+1 until end of turn for each 1 black mana you choose to pay. Rune Scar Demon, 7 mana, pretty simple, gonna get us a card from our library to our hand. Black is awesome with tutors. And then we do play 2 planeswalkers. We have Liliana of the Dark Realms and Sorin Markov. Sorin is just your basic pain in the ass planeswalker, going to minus and then set someone's life total to 10, so that way we can easily just kill them off with Maga or something else. But that's the gist of what we want him in here to do. The plus is okay, it's not fantastic, and the alt is probably something we're never going to do. Mindslaver, we would just play it in here if we wanted to do that. But Liliana of the Dark Realms is a little bit more consistent in mono black. Her plus is going to get us a swamp card. Her minus is going to be decent removal or a decent buff for any of our creatures. But her alt is going to be fantastic. Each one of our swamps is going to be able to tap for 4 black mana. Like I said before, mana sinks Maga, a lot of mana we can dump into X, very important for the deck, for the whole strategy. We do have 6 enchantments. We have Necropotence and Phyrexian Arena. I think both of those are pretty good in mono black, especially Necropotence. It's a little bit better. On power alone, I would say Necropotence is one of the most powerful cards in Magic the Gathering, period, but it comes with a lot of risks. If you don't know how to play with it properly, you could end up misplaying, so you have to pay attention to life totals, you have to pay attention to board presence, everything, but you should be able to keep a full hand with this card and get to your pieces pretty quickly, your mana doublers, anything that's going to help you win the game. Phyrexian Arena provides a little bit more consistency. It's a little bit safer. And it's going to give you an extra card draw, basically a Howling Mine just for yourself at the cost of that 1 life during your upkeep. Black Market is essential for this deck. If anyone board wipes, if anyone has any sort of mass creature removal, we can get a whole bunch of counters on Black Market, and then our pre-combat main phase, we get a ton of black mana. Like I said before, a ton of X-costed spells, a ton of mana sinks, fits in perfectly with the deck. Exquisite Blood, we're going to make our opponents lose a lot of life. Whether it's damage or life loss, it doesn't really matter. We're going to gain a bunch of life. And since we play Exquisite Blood, we might as well play the other combo piece, Sanguine Bond, so that we can go infinite and knock players out of the game a lot easier. So if you're keeping count, that's 2 infinite combos, one for infinite colorless mana with Rings of Brighthearth and Basalt Monolith, and the second being Sanguine Bond and Exquisite Blood. We have Wound Reflection to help us get the job done. At the end of each turn, each opponent loses life equal to the life he or she lost this turn. So that is also including damage, because damage causes life loss. So if Maga doesn't get the job done, Wound Reflection is going to pick up the pieces afterwards at the end of the turn. And that works even better if we have other stuff like Exsanguinate, which we're going to get to later. We have a ton of awesome spells. And we're going to move on to our sorceries. We have 17 of them. We have Bubbling Muck, which is basically the black High Tide. Each one of our swamps is going to produce an additional black mana whenever it's tapped for mana. This works for everybody, just like High Tide works for everybody. Then we have Black Sun Zenith, not really anything like Maga or anything like that, but more or less just a way to remove indestructible creatures. Really cool. -1/-1 counters are pretty cool because they last. It's not just until end of turn, so we can deal with a lot of indestructibles. A lot of powerful creatures are going to bite the dust when it comes to Black Sun Zenith. Then we have Consume Spirit, another cool black burn type of spell. We can only spend black mana on it, so be careful. Going to deal X damage to target creature or player, and we gain X life. So pretty simple, but goes pretty well with the deck. Then we have Damnable Pact. This one has a double purpose. We can either use it to draw cards ourselves and take a little bit of life loss, or we could use it to straight up burn a player. So really cool card, really underrated, doesn't see as much play in Commander as I would think it would. We also play Demonic Tutor, 2 mana, searching up any card is pretty powerful. Exsanguinate, one of the better cards that we can play in this deck. All we really need is a way to dump a ton of mana into this X, and we can win the game off of this spell alone. I see it all the time. If Mono Black has any win con, it's Exsanguinate, and it is really powerful, especially with Cabal Coffers, where we could have a ton of mana. Profane Command, yet another cool mana sink. We could, again, just kill off a player, but we get to choose 2, so we can have a target player lose X life, or we can return a target creature card with convert a mana cost X or less from our graveyard to the battlefield, or we could have target creature get -X/-X until end of turn, or up to X creatures gain fear until end of turn. So we get to choose 2 of those, but the most important one I would say is the very first one, having a target player lose X life. The fact that we can get one of those other options is pretty cool as well. Then we have Sign in Blood, pretty basic card draw. We could use this on an opponent if we're desperate, but we're likely just going to use this on ourselves. It's just 2 life for 2 cards. I think that's really good. Torment of Hailfire, yet another mana sink. This one is more brutal. This one's going to affect your opponents. They're going to have to choose between their cards and their their hand, their permanents, their non-land permanents, I mean, and they're going to have to give up 3 life for however many times you dump mana into X. So if you have 10 mana into X, they have to choose that 10 times. Which of those 3 do you value the most? Chances are it's going to be easy to pay 3 life multiple times. It's going to be harder to replenish your board state, so your opponents are going to really lose a lot of resources because of this card. It's fantastic for mono black. Read the Bones, yet again, Sign in Blood, good consistency in black. I know it may not seem like it, but card draw is card draw. It's important for any strategy. Damnation, basically the Black Wrath of God, a good board wipe. And then we have Mutilate, gonna give all creatures -1/-1 until end of turn for each swamp we control. Then we have Dark Petition. We get to search our library for a card, put it into our hand. If we have Spell Mastery, which we should be able to. We have a decent number of sorceries and instants. We get to add 3 black mana to our mana pool, so if everything goes right, basically another demonic tutor in our deck. Diabolic Revelation, one of the better cards in the deck. Yet another X-costed spell where we can get a bunch of cards from our deck to our hand. Really awesome. Then we have Beseech the Queen, a little bit worse than some of the other black tutors, but the only reason why that is because you have to reveal the card, because it does have a restriction on the cost of the card. It has to be under the total number of lands you control, but it can cost you as few as 3 black mana, so I think that's really awesome. Cheap tutors are always pretty good. Then we have Deadly Tempest to go with the theme of Black Burn. We're going to destroy all creatures, and each player is going to lose life equal to the number of creatures they controlled, which I think fits in perfectly well with this deck. We want to punish our opponents, we want to burn them out. Decree of Pain is going to get us a ton of card draw if there are a lot of creatures on the board. We get to destroy all of them. They can't be regenerated. If we're desperate, we can cycle it away for 5 mana. Give all creatures -2/-2 until end of turn. We get to draw a card. So that's going to do it for the sorceries, and we're going to wrap up this deck tech with 6 instants. We have Dark Ritual, going to work out really well with mana sinks. We get to add 3 black mana to our mana pool for 1 black mana. Sometimes it's really important to get out to those quick starts, get out our mana rocks. Never really hurts. We have Vampiric Tutor, yet another tutor. This one is awesome. 1 mana instant speed. We get to put the card on the top of our library. Go for the Throat, 2 mana, destroy target non-artifact creature. This is definitely one of the better 2 mana kill spells in black, so the main reason why I like playing it over some other stuff like Doomblade. Hero's Downfall, really awesome that we get the option between a creature or a planeswalker. That's extremely underrated about this card, is that you get to get rid of one of the more difficult to get rid of permanent types for just 3 mana instant speed, so I think that's definitely noteworthy. Sudden Spoiling, Split Second, this card is also extremely underrated. Basically nullifying any cool things about your opponent's creatures, making them 0/2s. They lose all abilities and have base power and toughness 0/2. They still retain any +1/+1 counters, so keep that in mind, but it's definitely going to make your opponent's creatures easier to deal with, and it's practically a black fog. Then we have Silence the Believers to wrap the entire deck tech up. We get to Strive, so we get to pay 3 additional mana for each target beyond the first, and we get to exile any number of target creatures and all auras attached to them. So yet again, good removal in black. So anyway guys, that's going to do it for this deck tech for Maga Traitor to Mortals. Hope you all enjoyed it. Hope you enjoyed it. Kyle, thanks for becoming a new patron of mine. I really enjoyed it. I didn't think I was going to enjoy it that much. I just looked at Maga, and it seemed a little too simple, just dealing damage, having an opponent lose life equal to the number of +1/+1 counters. Didn't really seem so interesting to me, but then I realized, hey, black has a lot of mana producing things, and a lot of other mana sinks that are pretty powerful too. So we can make a kind of a tribal theme out of that. Play cards like Exsanguinate, Torment of Hailfire, stuff like that. Double and cube that mana. Put even more into X. I think that's awesome. But as always, you guys have a wonderful day. Void here signing off. See you all next video.